to develop understandings about life and develop understandings about yourself psychologically and emotionally, so that you could come out of the ignorance that most people suffer from, and you could come out of that ignorance and start to develop wisdom. Not just information, not just knowledge, not just the education that you get in school, but wisdom. And wisdom is different than all of that. Wisdom is learning about your true nature, learning about reality, not as the way that you learned it in school, but in another way, a way that is actually truer than what you learned in school. I ended up writing 2 books since I've been teaching this class, and in those books are the basic teachings that I talk about here, and those basic teachings are the basic teachings that come from the wisdom teachings in the East, but they also come from more contemporary versions of those teachings that exist now in the West. They're both on Amazon. The second one is an Audible book as well, if you're interested in that. So in this class, I've talked a lot about Eastern teachings, Buddhism, Taoism, Indian teachers, meditation teachers, spiritual teachers, and so forth and so on. And there's a certain way that this conversation goes when it's talked about from that perspective, right? There's a lot of Sanskrit words, right? It seems religious, right? But it's not, right? And so for some people that creates some difficulty in terms of trying to understand these terms from Indian language or Sanskrit language or Pali language or Japanese or Chinese, because the translations aren't always perfect, right? And these teachings come from thousands of years ago, and so a lot of times the teachings were originally written in the context of their times, and when we listen to them now, we have to interpret that. We have to understand this is not then, this is not India. So today I wanted to talk about an American teacher, a sage that was born in this country, a sage that doesn't fit the profile of the Eastern gurus and teachers at all. In fact, this person, as far as I know, and I've been studying this person pretty intensely recently, and this person never uses the word meditation. Never uses the word meditation. So I want you all to really be clear, and I've said it in the past, that these teachings are universal. They're not Eastern or Western, right? They're universal teachings. The truth is universal. It's the same truth everywhere for everybody, because this truth is the truth about life. It's the truth about who we really are, and it's a truth about the way it really is. And when you come to understand that, it starts to become apparent why your life may not be working as well as you would like it to, maybe, or why you don't feel as good as you would like to feel, right? Because in these teachings, one of the things we come to learn and understand is that the reason that that's the case is because we have gone through a culture and an education system that doesn't teach you the truth about yourself and doesn't teach you spiritual truth. It teaches you just education for making money and being a citizen. And so because you don't have that information, you're on your own about, your spiritual life and about who you experience yourself to be and how you understand reality. And because that's the case, most people get lost and believe a lot of things that are worse than what they learned in school, or worse than what they learned in school. So the thing about it that is important to understand is that it's through ignorance that people suffer. It's through not knowing who they really are. It's through not knowing what the truth is, not knowing what reality is that they suffer. And because they're trying to be something they're not, they suffer. And because they're trying to do things in the world to experience contentment and experience satisfaction and experience well-being, and those things don't work because the things that people are doing to experience those things are not connected to the truth. And so people end up suffering, and people end up depressed, and people end up anxious, and people end up suicidal, and people end up on drugs and alcohol. And this is becoming more and more prevalent because the understanding that people have about who they are isn't very resilient. The understanding that people have about who they are is not very flexible. It's not very powerful. And so it doesn't take much to upset the boat, right? I mean, what's happening in the world right now is challenging with the pandemic, right? And we're about to go into a war situation, right? But the fact that those things are happening around the world, even though they're not affecting you directly yet, and even though they won't affect you any more than they already have directly, and that's not that profound compared to some of the things that have happened in the world, right? But that's all it takes for people to freak out, right? So now we have a mental health crisis, right? That depression is worse than it ever was. There are more anxious people than there ever were. And I hope that brings more people to become interested in meditation, right? Because maybe humanity needs a good kick in the ass, you know, because humanity's been sleeping for a long time. And it's about time to wake up. And maybe what it's going to take for people to wake up is that the suffering gets intense enough that they start looking for answers. They start looking for other alternatives. And in this practice of meditation and in these teachings, there tends to be an interest in the people who are older, right? Because as you get older, you get more freaked out about life in a sense, right? Because as you get older, you look in the mirror and you realize your body is on the way out, right? And so you have to deal with what that means. What's going to happen to me when the body dies, right? And of course, most people don't think about that much and talk about that much. It's just called distracting yourself, right? So people stay distracted as long as they can until they get the diagnosis, and then they freak out. So this is an opportunity for you to learn a way to avoid that reality, right? To discover that there is another way, and it does work. And so the other teacher that I want to talk about today is a woman. And in the Eastern teachings, you don't see many women at all, right? There's a few, but not many at all. And that's because of the cultures in the East and India, the caste system, and women, even in the West, were not considered to have rights until not too long ago, right? But this was a woman, and her name was Mildred, and she was born in Egg Harbor, New Jersey, right? So she's from right around this area, right? And when she got married, she was into peace, you know, world peace, you know, one of these people that is about world peace and so forth. And when she got married, the Korean War was going on and her husband was drafted. And so she tried to talk him into not going in the service, and she said, you know, they'll put you in prison, but I'll come and visit you, and we'll get through this together, and on and on and on. He thought she was nuts, and when he went in the service, right? Then she sent him a letter saying, as long as you're participating in war, I will not have any involvement with you. And so he took the letter to his commanding officer and showed it to his commanding officer, and the commanding officer said, that's grounds for a divorce. So he divorced her. And she didn't mean that to happen. She was very upset about it, but she accepted it. And then after that, you know, she was the first woman to walk the Appalachian Trail. And she was looking for meaning in her life at that point. She really felt that she had no direction, right? So one night she was walking in the woods, and she ended up walking all night in the woods. And in the morning she came to this clearing where she could see the moon, and she looked up and she asked God to give her direction. You know, she asked God to use her, to give her some way to serve in the world. And she said she had an epiphany, and she had this clear experience that she was free from any limitations that would keep her from being of service in the world. And she had this vision that she was going to walk as a way of getting attention for peace in the world. So she went out to California, and she started in Los Angeles. And she got a sweatshirt, and she decided to put a name on the sweatshirt, Peace Pilgrim. She was going to be a pilgrim for peace. And this way people could see that and ask her what she's walking, why she's walking, and she could talk about peace, right? So she left from Los Angeles. She walked for the next 2 years across the country, 25,000 miles, okay? And she didn't accept any money. She had no money on her. She had no possessions. She didn't ask for food. She would only eat if it was offered. and she would only sleep in a bed if somebody offered it to her. And there were times when she slept on the side of the road, but she did this for 2 years, 25,000 miles, and then she stopped counting the miles but kept walking. And she ended up walking 7 times across the country and back by herself, not with anybody else, alone, right? And she became, and when she walked, she would stop at schools and churches and give a talk about peace. And when she spoke, she was very clear, very clear. She never used spiritual terms per se. She didn't use the word meditation, but it was very clear that she understood meditation, and she did a lot of meditation, because if you're walking all day long across the country, you got plenty of time to meditate, and as you well know, you can meditate when you're walking, right? So this woman became somebody who was getting a lot of attention from the press. If you go on YouTube, I found 3 documentaries on her, and you'll find many interviews on her where you can hear her talk and you can hear the clarity that she speaks from. But I want to read something to you from the book that was put together. What happened is after she did this for 27 years, right? She was walking, and she mentioned at some point that she talked to God a lot when she was walking. And she said sometimes they had arguments, sometimes they had peaceful conversations. And she said one of the things that she asked God is when her job was done on the planet Earth, to take her quickly. She didn't want to have a prolonged death, right? So after 27 years, she was walking, and she got a ride at one point in the evening to go to a talk. And on the way to the talk, she was involved in a direct head-on collision and was killed. Right? So after she died, people who knew her, and she was known by people on the General Assembly in the United Nations, right? She was known by movie stars, she was known by politicians, who were inspired by her. And after she died, she had an email list with 6,000 people on it, right, that kept track of her. And after she died, some of the people who were close to her sent an email out to the 6,000 people saying that they were raising funds to put together a book, and the book would be a book only of her spoken words, from all of the interviews she did and talks that she gave and so forth. And the book would be free because she said that the truth should never be charged money for, right? So these people that put the book together have been sending the book out for free ever since. Since that time, over 1 million copies have been sent out. There have been programs that started in prisons based on the book and her teachings about peace. The book so far has sold over 1 million copies. It's now in 22 languages. Right? So this is an example of the impact that one person can have, right? So, and in that book, she wrote what her preparation was to prepare her to do this walk back and forth across the country. And it's interesting because when you look at her preparation, it's a spiritual preparation. And when you look at the preparation and you read the details of what she did and how she prepared herself, it's exactly the same as the teachings from the East. Exactly the same as the teachings from the East. Right, so and they've maintained a website for her called thepeacepilgrim.org, right? And on that website, you can get a copy of the book for free. It's a PDF book that you can download on your computer. And you can call a phone number there and have paper copies of the book sent to you, as many as you want. Some teachers use it in their classes and they order a case of the books at a time. So this is a piece that I took from the book, where she's talking about the things that she went through to purify herself and prepare herself for what she was going to do in her life. And at one point she talks about relinquishments. And she says, now, the last part, this is at the very end of the things that she did, right? But all of what she did is very valuable to look at. She said, now the last part deals with relinquishments. Once you've made the first relinquishment, you have found inner peace, because it's the relinquishment of self-will. Sound familiar? She, as far as I can tell, she knew nothing about some of the teachers that I've been talking about here. And here she is making the exact same statement. She says that peace is a function of accepting the fact that you do not have free will, self-will, right? And after studying some of her material and so forth, I think I may change my focal point. I think I may change my focal point. Instead of you're worrying about becoming enlightened, right? Because that has all kinds of bullshit with it, right? I think you'd be much better off really focusing your attention and setting your goal to be peace. Just peace. Just peace, right? Because if I were to say to you right now, you can choose. You can either have inner peace for the rest of your life and live in peace, or be enlightened. Which one would you take? Right. Of course you would take the inner peace. What's better than that? And inner peace is considered one of the qualities of enlightenment that makes it enlightenment, right? So, and for those who are new here, I have been talking about the idea of relinquishing your foolish notion that you have free will to God's will, right? I have been talking about that as a primary aspect of where peace comes from. Letting go of your good ideas, right? Because your good ideas have caused you all the trouble you've been in, right? And so she goes on, you can work on subordinating the lower self by refraining from doing the not good things you may be motivated toward, not suppressing them, but transforming them so that the higher self can take over your life. If you are motivated to do or say a mean thing, you can always think of a good thing. You deliberately turn around and use that same energy to do or say a good thing instead. It works. The second relinquishment is the relinquishment of the feeling of separateness. We begin feeling very separate and judging everything as it relates to us, as though we were the center of the universe. Even after we know better intellectually, like you do, even after we know better intellectually, we still judge things that way, including yourself. In humans, the whole thing is totality. It's only from that higher viewpoint that you can know what it is to love your neighbor as yourself. From that higher viewpoint, there becomes just one realistic way to work, and that is for the good of the whole. As long as you work for your selfish little self, you're just one cell against all those other cells, and you're way out of harmony. But as soon as you begin working for the good of the whole, you find yourself in harmony with all of your fellow human beings. You see, it's that easy. So, for those of you who have been here, you can hear she's saying literally the exact same thing. The idea of understanding you are not a separate self. Your consciousness is not separate from all consciousness, right? And your will, thy will be done, should be something that you practice. And she said, in a lot of the interviews that she gave, she said that humanity understands the concept of peace, right? I mean, I was thinking about it. If you think back to the Vietnam War, all the peace marches, peace as a concept has been around, right? And people understand it, people march and do, all that stuff, right? People understand the concept of peace, but people don't practice it. They don't practice it. And so whatever you don't practice doesn't really make any difference, right? And that's the reason the world is still in the toilet, right? Because we think it's enough to understand the concepts about everything, and we don't understand it's the experience that allows you to practice peace when you experience your true nature. It's not a good idea. It's not something you have to force yourself to do. It's something that's natural when you're in touch with who you are. It's something that's natural when you're in touch with who you are. And so what I recommend to you is to see if you can make that your focal point, to experience peace. You want to experience what it means to be peaceful, to feel at home in your skin, to be able to sleep at night. One of the things some of the people said about her was that she was very hard to wake up in the morning. That's how deep she slept. And one guy was saying that she slept one time on a beach, right? And they went to pick her up in the morning, and on this beach was all sand. There was no vegetation or anything. And when they went to pick her up in the morning, there was a yellow flower growing next to her head. The only flower on the entire beach, right? And they said it was very hard to wake her up because she would sleep so deep. Well, of course she would. I mean, if you're walking all day, right? Especially if you're in peace and you're walking all day, right? So when they woke her up and they said, look, there's one flower, one yellow flower. It grew right next to your head overnight, and there are no flowers anywhere on this beach. And she said, oh, there's an explanation for everything, and just walked away. That's one sign of a spiritually awake person. They don't get involved in miracles. They think that's a distraction, right? So I really encourage you to, I will on the email list send the link out to the website, right? And you can download the book if you're interested in reading the book. It's all her teaching in the book, right? And the word meditation is not in the book, right? But she talks about a lot of different things that are the way that you come to be awake. She talks about how to manage your body. She talks about, the spiritual life. She talks about what it looks like when you're being peaceful, how you deal with conflict with others, and so forth and so on. And I think it's very appropriate. And I was really happy because I had heard about her years ago when I was teaching in the prison system, right? But, one of the things I realized is, I have had the privilege of being exposed to so many teachers and teachings that I can't remember them all. And in this case, she, for some reason, just popped into my mind, and I started to look into it on the internet and came up with all this material on her. So, what's that? I don't know, I don't remember. But they called her the Peace Pilgrim. She never told anybody her name. She didn't want to be known as a person. She didn't tell anybody her name. She just said, call me Peace Pilgrim.
What year was she born?
Well, she started the walk in 1953. So, I was trying. Yeah, it was during the Korean War, right? But then after that, she did this for 27 years, so she was still doing it during the Vietnam War, right? But what she was talking about was two things. She was saying that if you want to be a natural expression of peace in the world, and if you want to be a commitment and work for peace in the world peace, right, not war, you first have to start here. You have to be at peace with yourself. Otherwise, it's not real peace, it's just a good idea, right? But if it's real peace, then you're expressing that in the way you're being all the time with the people around you, right? It means that you don't fight, right? It means that you don't allow yourself to get into conflict with yourself. You don't fight with yourself, and you don't allow yourself to get into conflict with yourself. She made an interesting comment, and if you read her book, you'll hear her talk about this. She said, I don't have negative thoughts. Now, this is an interesting thing, because we talk here about thinking and, whether you're thinking or not thinking, and whether you cannot think and all that stuff, right? And so she says that I don't have negative thoughts. But if you listen to her teaching, she says that over time, she gradually learned to pay attention to her thoughts in such a way that, I just read it to you, when a negative thought came, she said the energy that it took for that thought to exist, I will use to do something positive. That's transformation. So the question is, can you be clear enough and can you be present enough to practice something like that? When you get pissed off, to understand, okay, there's energy here, right? When you get pissed off, there's energy here, right? Can you be awake enough to take that energy and do something good with that energy? So she practiced over time eliminating the negative energy until it got to the point where she didn't have negative thoughts. And even if a negative thought did occur in her mind, she could still say, I don't have a negative thought, because she wouldn't claim it as hers. Do you understand? That's one of the things I try and get across here. please understand that you do not think thoughts. That is such a key to how this all works. You do not think thoughts. Thoughts happen in your mind, and they come from your, they come from your education, they come from your conditioning, they come from your past, right? But you're not causing them, they're happening there, right? And if you start paying attention through meditation, where you're learning how to pay attention, if you start paying attention to those thoughts and you start being aware of the negative thoughts and you stop acting on those thoughts and you start dismissing those thoughts and creating positive thoughts instead, the time will come when there will be very few negative thoughts. And if any negative thoughts arise, they will not get expressed by you, right? Can you see how eventually this is going to get pretty peaceful? Yeah. So this is and one of the things she really tried to make clear to people is that she's not special. Jesus Christ said he wasn't special. The Buddha said he wasn't special. Is it easy? No. You know why it's not easy? Because you're already hypnotized. You're already hypnotized by what you learned from the society and from the culture and from wherever you learned what you learned, right? So you've already got an operating system, right? So it's not like you can just take what she's teaching or take what you get from her and put it into action. No, you have to deal with your already way of being. You have to deal with the fact you've already got a program running here and that program isn't working very well. It's not working well for you. It's not working well for anybody that is depending on that program to be happy and experience peace in life. So now's a good time to start a peace movement with yourself, right? Because if you succeed in becoming peaceful, then you might be able to make a contribution, right? Because more than ever, we need people who take a stand for peace. So far, it hasn't worked. John Lennon tried, right? A lot of people tried, right? So far, it hasn't worked. But this is a new world we're living in here, There are more people now than there ever were that practice meditation, and more people now than there ever were that are interested in these ideas. So if you succeed at being peaceful, you might be able to start a movement or be part of a movement now to keep this world from getting any worse. Because the thing and one of the things that's a good sign is that this war that is about to happen in the Ukraine, right? It's interesting. It is different. It's still war, but it is different. Have any of you noticed that the way we're getting into this war is a little different than the past? Right? There's a lot of discussion about there not being a war now, isn't there? Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion now about how we're all going to suffer if there's a war, right? So that is a product of the past work that people did for peace. So there's a higher consciousness now about this. And I think people are a lot more willing to take on the responsibility for not allowing other people to die for no reason. That's the big price of war, right? Is needless suffering and needless loss of life. And if this war occurs in Ukraine, guaranteed there's going to be a lot of people killed. A lot of people killed. So that's a horrible thing that we're this far along technologically and this far along in terms of how sophisticated we are as a human race, and we're still living in a cave when it comes to our behavior. So don't let that be you. One of the things that I've said here as a psychologist is that if you practice what's being taught here, and if you understand the value of it, and if you do what you need to do to get a deep understanding of these core wisdom teachings, as Hal says, the core wisdom teachings, right? That it will transform your life, right? That you will have a life that you wouldn't otherwise have had. It's really possible for you, but it's not free lunch. It's not going to happen by itself. You have to commit yourself to practicing meditation. You have to commit yourself to studying the core wisdom teachings, which are available now more than they ever were for humanity. Never in the history of humanity has there been more information available about wisdom and spirituality than there is now. And more people have computers than they ever did, especially because of the pandemic, right? So that makes it even more available because on the internet are all the current teachers, all the teachers that existed since the beginning of recorded time. So you have no excuse. You have no excuse for not being peaceful. You have no excuse for not being enlightened, right? But it's up to you. It's up to you. Right? Make sure you understand that a meditation practice is an everyday practice, right? Make sure you understand that this is the most important thing you're doing in your life, and I'm not kidding. It's the most important thing you could do in your life. It could make the biggest difference in your life than anything you do in your life, right? So keep doing that and keep coming to class. And as you all know, I will keep offering you more and more opportunities to listen to teachers that are different. And this woman is about as different as you're going to get. And she's saying the exact same thing when it comes to the teachings as all the great teachers. As far as I'm concerned, her and Buddha and Ramana Maharshi, they're all in the same group. She's no different than them. She's no different than Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ said, I'm not different than any of you, right? But how many people took up that path? How many people actually took him for his word, right? And learned what it would take to experience what he was talking about. And what he was talking about is readily and immediately available to you and me all the time. The truth and the core wisdom and your true nature is available to you all the time. It's never not true. It's always here. And if you learn to recognize it, and if you're familiar enough with it to experience it, right, you can go to it anytime you want. You can go to it anytime you want.